am excited and delighted to have as our guest today Reverend Angela Whitenhill, who is a licensed clinical social worker. She serves as the Mental Health Initiative Manager of the National Benevolent Association, which is the Health and Social Services General Ministries of the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. I knew that was a mouthful. She's doing a major work. She pulls from her experiences after obtaining a Master's of Divinity from Union in New York, a Master's of Social Work, and also a Master's from the University of Denver, Graduate School of Social Work, and a certificate in marriage and family therapy from the Denver. She has all of the training. Okay, she has all of the training, and she's active in her congregation, and she currently co-leads racial justice efforts through an ecumenical cohort of churches in Cary, North Carolina, and that group is called Community in the Heart of Christ. Community in the Heart of Christ. And I'm so excited to have her with us. She's extremely busy. She leads groups around the country for the Disciples of Christ. And also she does some things on her own to help clergy. And I saw her 2 or 3 years ago leading a group of clergy. And I said, she's phenomenal. People need to hear from her. And she's so busy. I think it took me 6 or 7 months to get her on here, okay? But she agreed to do it, and I'm just happy to have her. And today we want to talk about clergy wellness, overall, big umbrella, and certain critical issues under that. Most of you know who follow me that I posted this past week that someone said you can't be a worship leader and have depression. I also, exactly, believe it or not, a preacher actually said that on a broadcast. And then others posted about praying the depression away. I got some of those comments as well. And we all know, we saw that report, or at least most of you did, about 55 clergy having committed suicide since 2013. And of course, we know that that number is likely much higher because the deaths of so many clergy are underreported or go unreported because we hide it. We will actually hide it. So for all of those reasons, and just because ministry can be so difficult, whether you're the senior pastor, the associate clergy, whoever you are, it can be difficult. I brought on Reverend Angela Whitenhill to talk to us today in her own way about so many of those issues. So right now, I want to say welcome. And if you would begin by talking to us a bit about what is mental health. When we talk about someone's mental health, what are we talking about?
Definitely. Well, thank you. It is an honor to just be with you, Dr. Simmons, and your patience in waiting for me. But I am grateful to just be able to speak to all of you listening around such a delicate topic. So just start off with what is mental health is a great way to start, because when we talk about mental health, you oftentimes have a whole lot of emotional reaction to the word, and everybody kind of thinks something different about it. So I'd like to share how I think about it. And all this is for debatable, but just to have a way in which we can think through this in our faith, but also just a practical, tangible way. So how I like to start thinking about it is that mental health really is just health. Mm-hmm. And I make that dramatic pause because I stress over and over again, it is just health. Mm-hmm. Typically, when we talk about mental health, we automatically think mental illness, we think crazy, we think negative reaction. But really, mental health is literally health. It is all the things we do, think, and feel that contribute to our emotional, social, psychological well-being. it is measured by our ability simply to cope with stress. So if you're a trained practitioner, you'll know that the way we measure one's mental health is thinking about how that person responds to change and stress, and really mapping if that response is a healthy response or not, right? We like to lift up the idea that mental health is not necessarily a diagnosis. So it doesn't mean depression, right? It's not an emotion. It's just a state of your health, like a physical health. It's on a spectrum. So someone can have healthy or poor mental health or excellent mental health. But I would like to stress that to start breaking the stigma around even saying the word mental health. That is really just our health. And thinking about that, knowing that our mental health can change over time. And so I appreciate you lifting up a lot of the ways we think about mental health spiritually. So I'd love to spend some time in our conversation kind of thinking through both. But I think about one of the things I share and when I talk about my own mental health is this idea of the psyche, which can be a really scary word in general. And just, yep, for those of us who know that theology is the talk of God, well, psychology is the talk of the soul. And the same people who talked about God and talked about soul used to be one group in the academy, and now they're different fields. So we're really talking about this idea that's between the soul, but it's also an organ, a brain in our actual physical body. And so I just want to name a little bit about the psyche. It's like an onion. This is the way I've thought about it. It's intricately layered. It develops over time. It's an amalgamation of our experiences. It's like a web of information that literally governs how we see reality. So a little council government in our head. And this is something that's an organ that is developed throughout the smells we smell, the sounds we smell, just builds over time. But when you think about this organ, just like any other organ, it can be susceptible to fatigue, to distortion, to illness. If you hit it too hard in the back, if you're a football player and get hit in the front, it actually switches how you see reality and how you perceive, how you smell, how you taste, how you think. And so an example of how that is spiritual, because I do think there's an element of that, is I was a young girl in California, raised with all these beauty standards, right? And I thought I was too fat, and I thought I was too dark, and I didn't think my hair was pretty. And the church said, "You're fearfully and wonderfully made." And I truly believe the Spirit of God told my soul I was fearfully and wonderfully made. But my cognitive processing was distorted by socialization. So I would say, I'm really good at soccer. I'm really good at math. I could not think I was pretty until I reworked that organ through therapy, through socialization, through healthy construction of beauty, that now I can literally interpret how the soul spoke to me in my mind. And so I think about mental health as being the process by which the soul can hear from God, but our minds have to be dealt with on a practical level as well as a spiritual level, and really sometimes reworked in the natural.
And as part of that working, sometimes medication, therapy, etc. Say a little bit more about that reworking.
Yes, so perfect. So the reworking can be a natural, we call churches natural community, families natural community. You can have a reworking naturally through just conversation that literally helps you think differently about something. So having people, show me beauty of other sorts or seeing other types of beauty. There are some cognitive distortions, or there are some parts of our brains when it gets too fatigued through burnout, through malnutrition, through physical trauma. Simply talking to an untrained friend is not going to really help. You actually do need medication at times. One way I think about depression is depression can be an overwhelming sense of sadness at one time. Most people can hold the sadness and through different normal practices over time become happy again or not have the sadness. But there are times where that sadness literally change your physical makeup, your hormones shift so much. We think about postpartum depression. Right. When the baby comes out, all the hormones come with the baby. Your brain cannot kick itself back in because it actually needs hormones. It needs that drug to kick it, right? And you'll find some of our mental illnesses actually do need either medication or a trained professional to actually rework or think or ask you questions in such ways that your brain can actually respond to it. And I can talk a little about like how therapy works or looks, but
we'll get to that. We'll get to that. All right. All right. So that's a good way of helping us get started. Just understanding, first of all, when I say mental health, I'm just talking about my health.
That's it.
I'm just start right there. So I want everybody on this broadcast to know, instead of making this something that's difficult and nebulous and crazy and oh my God stuff, first, we're just talking about your health. That's why I titled this Clergy Wellness. We're talking about your health, okay? So we know how difficult it can be to be clergy and to do the work. You're clergy. So on top of everything else that you do other kinds of ministry work. Talk to me a bit about, because most of my viewers are African American. Talk to me a bit about, because I see some increases in depression and fatigue and burnout and overload in this season in our culture. Talk to me how you believe systemic oppression impacts mental health and our ability to stay well. How is systemic oppression that's continuous? How does this impact our mental health and our ability to stay well? Can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, this is an amazing question. This is where I think the mental health field misses the mark at times as well, is really thinking about systemic oppression. So I'm glad you're lifting that up. Two things. One, I just want to explain risk factors and protective factors. And then I want to talk about what it looks like for our mental health as people who are marginalized.
Okay, risk factors, protective factors. Okay, yes. Go ahead.
So those of you who are in any kind of mental health profession or social kind of work, you'll know this term called risk factors and protective factors. And simply, we know that our mental health is impacted by the amount of protective factors in our life or risk factors. Risk factors are the types of conditions that are essentially increased fatigue or danger for your physical body, your emotional state. So these are things like socioeconomic status. These are things like poverty. These are things like actual physical abuse, emotional abuse, access to food deserts, all these elements of our environment that cause us to have physical, emotional risk. And then protective factors are resources that mediate that. So you don't have the money to buy food, but you have a neighbor who will give you their eggs, right? There's this access element. Protective factors could be strong relationships. It could be healthy theology. It could be a good friend. It could be anything that really mediates stress and what we find in risk. So those two things are important because when you think about systemic oppression or marginalized populations, the amount of risk factors that are just typical in life are going to be quadrupled by systemic risk factors that are actually perpetuated by systemic powers. I think of all of us who have had, particularly racial minorities who have had historic trauma. Right. So the sexual assault that happened in slavery, that doesn't go away just because you free, right? It's going to be passed down to generation that we're trying to figure out that trauma through how we talk to our kids or raise our kids. I think about grief and loss for our Native American populations, that genocide really just kind of wiped people out. And how do you grieve after centuries of holding that? Right. There's also identity as pathology. When your identity is pathologized, literally, you're a Black man, therefore you're more aggressive. And so these systemic ways in which we respond, we do not diagnose Black men with depression. We will just charge them, right? There's no mental health access to say, well, that wasn't an act of violence. That was actually depression that came out through someone's body. Or we know with police brutality and traffic violations, and there's a result in death before being tried. So this is because your identity as a Black male is assumed to be violent, even though you may just be having depression and it comes out a certain way. Same with those of us who maybe don't conform to gender in a certain way. This, and we know in our mental health diagnosis, is an actual diagnosis. And so when your own identity is pathologized, it's how do you get help for something that you are? It turns into this part of yourself that you actually have to find services and work around systems in ways that other people don't. The last two is just multiple risk factors. So if you are a person, a marginalized person in society, access to services will be harder for you, all kinds of services. Having chronic health issues and to be able to fix those. We talk about malnutrition, broken homes. We know these are all normal factors. This actually impacts our mental health. It's the organ in our brain can't deal with the amount of stress, not because we're not strong enough, but because the amount of stress we're dealing with on a daily basis is more than other people, right? And so I think about how that has showed up, and we don't have time today, but I have these really cool conversations with Black church culture, and the ways in which we do things is a lot of sometimes our actual coping skills. Those of us who know a certain form of therapy, you actually go back and forth to mediate trauma in your brain. If you can go left to right, the trauma actually dissipates. Well, when you're in church, we rock, right? And we think we rock just because we rock, but maybe it is actually us dealing, right? So I think there's really powerful ways we cope. And then sometimes in our culture, we might cope out of survival and then pass that down to our children. And it actually works against us over time. And so these are all ways in which our mental health is impacted on a greater scale than others who have privilege because of these factors.
And I think that's really important for those of us who are not the majority culture in terms of numbers. And I don't believe in you are a minority or a majority, but I'm just speaking about numbers here and what they mean relative to access to services, to health and things like that. I really wish that African American churches in particular understood the ways in which systemic oppression causes depression, causes and increases mental health risk factors that never get addressed and instead get pathologized. So you're the angry Black woman, you are the teen who is a thug or out of control, you're the young girl who's too hot. And so we end up pathologizing ourselves because of what the culture did. We end up taking that in and heightening our own stress and harming our mental health. And you can jump right in. You can say some more about that if you want to, before I go to the next question.
Yeah, as you're talking, I thought of a really clear example in the mental health field. An eating disorder typically is treated and diagnosed if you eat too much or too little. Black women will go to the doctor and the doctors will tell us that we're obese because we're eating too much. We'll never get an eating disorder diagnosis, which is a mental health emotional. So we walk away thinking we're just overweight, we're just eating too much. When the reality is, if I was another person, if I was a white woman not eating enough, I would get all these services for eating disorder and I would know I have an eating disorder. It's not that I'm too frivolous, but for us, it's a perfect example where we pathologize thinking, oh, we're just eating too much. And it's actually a symptom sometimes of depression, or it's actually an emotional state where food becomes an addictive behavior. And it's not because we just don't have any boundaries around food. And so there's a lot of these things that you see show up for us that we just think, oh, we got to get healthy. And it's like, no, we have an eating disorder just like everyone else does.
Yes, absolutely. And you have to get that diagnosis. I remember at one point I was grieving double losses, back to back. And I started to eat excessive amounts of sugar. And I was fortunate that I had some trained friends around me who said, that's what that is. You haven't just started to like sugar more, that your depression is causing you to do certain things. And that comfort that you're getting from sugar, you're doing because of X, Y, Z. So it's important for us to understand when we go to doctors, we have to understand what's being told to us historically because of how we are viewed by the larger society. Go ahead. You want to say something else? Go ahead.
as you're talking, I'm thinking about viewers and people like myself who used to think, well, depression, what is that? And I don't have it, and that's spiritual. And I just want to clarify what we mean by a diagnosis is if when you come into our office, we're going to look at a bunch of symptoms. We're going to ask you, hey, are you sleeping okay? Are you eating the same? Are you happy about things? If you have at least 5 symptoms for one set diagnosis, we'll go, oh, we think you have depression. Just like if you come in with a runny nose and foggy head, oh, you have the flu. The only reason why we diagnose is not because it's an identity, it's not because it's permanent, it's not because you're wrong. It's so that other professionals can go, we know how to treat this. And there are moments where I want the church to know a diagnosis is only for us to treat. It's only for us to help. It's not for us to feel shame. It's not for us to think we're going to stay this forever or the devil got us in a way that's different from the other person. It literally is, you have enough symptoms and you may have different symptoms than her. But if you have enough symptoms, we have a treatment plan for you and we'll get you back to the place where you can mediate that stress. So it's not
it's not a death sentence. It's not that you're not praying enough. It's not that you don't know enough scripture or anything. It's a diagnosis to help you get treated. It's a diagnosis. And if you are getting diagnosed properly, okay, so that you're working with health professionals who are not pathologizing you, etc., it can really, really be helpful. So I want everyone to also understand the importance, which is why I brought on this particular health provider as opposed to some others that I could have called upon. It's important that you get the right health provider and so that you are diagnosed and can get help. Don't want us to run out of time because I got some other questions that people have sent to me and have been asking me over time. Let's get specific. Let's get specific to a large part of my audience, whether they are senior pastors, ministers of music, Christian education directors, clergy, ministers who do things in the church. Talk to me a bit about how clergy vocational stress affects mental health over time.
Amen. I appreciate you for this. This is a population, honestly, as a therapist, I didn't know existed and was so at a loss for services, only because those of us who are clergy, this is one of the only professions that really doesn't have one specific role. And if you'd say a therapist, what is your role? I can tell you the things I cannot do. I'm not your Facebook friend. I don't go to your weddings. I do this one thing. And after 50 minutes, I never talk to you again. If you're a doctor, if you're all these things, pastors, one of the things is as clergy people, as worship directors, as people over nursery, we become multiple professional roles. So we're helping with finances. We're doing marriage counseling. We're doing building projects. We are helping the kids down the street find homes. We are doing social work jobs, business jobs. That is inhuman, right? Nobody can do that.
No one.
And so the brilliance of a clergy person is somehow we find out how to figure out how to do them all just enough to not go, to completely burn out. Right.
Go bonkers.
Right. And we find other ways to mediate that kind of stress. One of the things that I've seen is it turns out in our social life, we rarely have actual friends. It's too much work.
Whoa. Talk about that.
That would be a symptom to me of someone who has over burnt out or lack of boundary in job. And this particular clergy job is my social life is actually going to be hurt by this. Now, we'll still be really successful and no one will ever care. We won't even notice over time. So you hear a lot of clergy talking about feeling lonely, feeling isolated, feeling not understood. And the reality is it's probably true because there's not time to be in a safe environment where you're a peer and where you're just there to receive, right?
You can trust people.
Where you can trust people. Yeah. Because in society, you are kind of like a mayor in terms of fame. You are also like a teacher. You can't just check out and go to the store and not be pastor or not be clergy.
That's right.
So that particular element of it adds stress. There is also the ways in which, for those of us who want socialized or personal relationships or family, the type of setup of the role, the days and times we work, night times, weekends, will really put pressure on other family members or other relationships that they're typically off at those times. The 9 to 5 is not our schedule.
That's right.
So just on a social level, again, that will cause some isolation. The last little thing I want to lift up and I want to talk a little bit more about now, what do we do, right? Is this kind of social expectation that's really a theological expectation that we do represent God. I mean, that is a big difference between a doctor or a teacher or
Exactly.
We hold in society this role that has been for centuries deemed as somehow representative of God. And so when we take that on internally and we don't move as a human, like just doing a normal job, there is so much pressure for us to be perfect,
Amen.
for us to be God, that the brain and the emotion cannot hold that. It is not how we're wired, right? And so I do a lot of work with clergy through National Beloved Association, and we do peer groups, and we create these spaces for clergy just to go, I'm sad, I'm tired, I'm scared, I'm normal, I'm human. You know, I haven't.
I'm not God. I am not God.
And I'm not supposed to be God. And so we talk about what does a pastor do? I'm here to do spiritual development, to do theological formation, and that's it. You know, and we're like, good for you. Now, what are you going to do? Well, I don't really want to preach. I'm gonna do Bible study, or like really crafting out for people. What is your job, and how do you really go into your community and name that and set boundaries for what you're good at? Some of our pastors are justice people, and they're like, I can organize folks. And so it's really that time or space where clergy cannot be God, but also know how the structures of our job are pressing us in our minds and in our emotions in ways that other jobs just don't have.
Say a bit more about the notion of setting boundaries, because as you said, pastors and ministers, not just pastors, but ministers, have multiple roles.
Yes.
Some that they take on, some that are part of their contract, but some they believe that they have to do ministry the way they understand it. So talk to me a bit about drawing some boundaries from you're the preacher, you're the teacher, the enslavement of your people makes you think sometimes you're also the lawyer.
Yes.
You're the social worker. You're the person, the counselor, when a family comes in and says, my children are going crazy and it's making me crazy, whatever, we mean by crazy. So how is it? Because we can't be all of those things. We can have multiple roles, but we can't be great at all of these things. So talk to me about how you start to help clergy to say some boundaries and say, here's what I would recommend you do with someone else. Or here's how I need to push this to the side because I'm really not good at it. And I don't want to upset people, but I'm not God. Talk to me a bit about how we do that.
This is a whole other moment. So I want to encourage us to keep thinking through this. I'm gonna give you a little bit.
I know you can't give it all to us, but I'm telling you in advance, people are gonna ask for you to come back.
That's right. There is a thing called emotional boundaries that I would focus on with this. Emotional boundaries are something we're not taught how to build and keep. There's an amazing book that I read, Henry Cloud's book called Boundaries. And I would kind of send that to you to post
but it gives boundaries.
It's just boundaries. He uses scripture actually to debunk some of the theological ways in which we push over our boundaries. But this, in general, emotional boundaries is something that you learn as a child over time. It's how you take on. I think about if you could see my screen, if there was a line, there's this line in the middle of the screen. It's when somebody does something, I internally I've paused and I've processed, and I can ask myself, is the way I'm feeling about what you just did my responsibility or your responsibility? And people who have strong boundaries, say somebody goes, my little kids at work will go, Miss Angela, your face is making me mad. Okay. So I go, okay, I can easily feel guilty for something that I have no idea if I did or not. Or I can stop and go, am I trying to make them feel mad with my face? Yes, I am. Therefore, that's my emotional responsibility, the guilt or the conviction I should feel. If I'm just looking at the person and they're feeling upset, that's actually their emotional responsibility.
Wow.
Now, how I hold that is there's a way in which we're trained as pastors or clergy to really push that kind of back on. I see that you're upset around my face. Let's talk about what about my face makes you upset. That is your emotion. I'm not going to feel it. That's very hard for those of us who've been raised in environments where our emotions were overridden by a lot of different experiences. So for some of us like clergy who are helpers and givers and maybe through our childhood always had to feed or give to people, when somebody says, Pastor, I need you, clergy, I need you, and they're upset because we can't perform for them, there are times where I emotionally go, that is their emotion, and I don't hold it. And I go, I'm so sorry I hurt you. Let's find someone else. So I would say one thing I go to therapy for, and I do this and I encourage all my clergy friends, when you go to therapy, say, I want to work on my emotional boundaries. There are complete treatment plans that we know how to help them build better boundaries. It's there. The other thing I want to lift up is just structural supports. So we're doing a lot of just, brainstorms with clergy around when somebody comes about the building, do you have somebody in the church that does building stuff? If not, can you put it on pause? Is there somebody, there's a therapist in the church can feel this, but there's these kind of moments of pause where you stop and say, who can I refer these people to? And if I can't, then we just say, hey, guess what, guys? I can help you spiritually. I can pray with you. I can come alongside you in these ways, but I cannot help you with your law, or I can't help the building. We're going to have to find someone together. So it's really accepting that limit, which can be hard if we feel we aren't supposed to be human, right? Communicating that in a very mature way, but saying, this is a problem this church has, not me, right? The church has a building falling apart.
Yeah, exactly. Because, as if you're the senior minister or you're in charge of particular ministry, something that needs fixing, you believe it has something to do with you individually, So instead of the building has a problem or an individual has a problem that someone else would be better at assessing and helping with, we take everything personally because we've not been given the level of training in school or by culture or through the church writ large to say, you don't have to play God. You are a representative of, but you do not have all power. Okay. You really don't have all power.
It's literally set up in our training. I appreciate you said that, because it wasn't until I went to my social work degree did I learn how to facilitate people's processes. So and this is a theology of pastoring that people can debate over, but now for me as a clergy, I know when I show up to any spiritual experience, I'm here to facilitate the Spirit moving amongst this group. I'm going to group facilitate them. I'm not bringing one thing and they listen to me. I'm like, hey, you have a gift, you have a gift. Now that's hard to do, but I do think if I show up a certain way and there's an expectation for my own self, that I'm just here to pull out what's in these people and get them to work together. My job is not to feed them a particular thing. Now, if I've been in ministry for 40 years and that has been my job, people go, well, Angela, I can't just jump in and say people, hey, I'm not gonna do this anymore. Then that's when I do think, let's sit together, right? And just work out, how do we change how I move in this place? And what does it mean for the church now that we are doing this group together or doing this work together? So it's not easy. And I know people are like, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about.
No, it's definitely not easy, but it's becoming, it's probably always been, but now we recognize how critical
it
has become for clergy to learn how to set emotional boundaries and to sit with people like you and their therapists and others to say, I've been doing this 20 years this way, and I realize it's not healthy.
That's right.
I realize it's hurting my family.
Mm-hmm.
I realize, and how can we start to look at that, and so that I won't burn out, and those kinds of things. Let me move on so I can just, this is so wonderful. We could keep, areas are so big, you could just keep unpacking them. So we were already slightly talking about this, but let me ask it very specifically. Describe the ways mental health and wellness issues show up in clergy life. It's piggyback on some of what we just talked about.
Well, and there are 4 words I use that I'll explain because they might sound too clinical.
But no, I've heard this. Go ahead.
So burnout doesn't sound too clinical, right? We know what burnout is.
We know what that is, yeah.
Burnout, I will say from a clinical point of view, though, the way burnout works for us, it is an accumulation of over workload over time. So the body, the mind, the spirit cannot be completely stressed with responsibility too long. And so you eventually grow an emotional and mental capacity, and you'll hit your capacity and you'll feel burnt out. And that is actually a psychological process. It's not just because you've lost your flair for ministry. Your brain is going, I'm done. I can't do it. Yeah. One thing about burnout I want to lift up is the length of time you've been overloaded or stressed. That's how long it takes to undo. So burnout is an overtime kind of thing. You can't self-care for 2 days and think I can kick back in and go preach like I used to. You won't preach. You won't want to preach. You won't even have an idea how to preach, because it takes, if you've been doing it for 15 years, it's going to take about 15 years to undo that burnout. Because what happens is the parts of your psyche and your emotion that you've depleted and not nourished, it has to be nourished and it can't be depleted. So it's going to take what it's going to take. And that's usually my creativity, right? It takes my creativity away first. I want to juxtapose that with compassion fatigue. This might be a word that we don't use so much.
We don't.
Compassion fatigue is something we talk about amongst caregivers, human service responders, clergy, where it's different from burnout in that compassion fatigue is when you grow numb or you emotionally hit a capacity for compassion. So if you're honest, like me, the more work you do, that some points you just don't care. Somebody comes to you and you're like, I really don't care.
I do not want to be bothered.
Nope. I will perform my clergy duties because I know how. But when I go home, I am completely I'm emotionally done. There are various symptoms of this. Compassion fatigue happens when you are putting others' needs over yours consistently. The brain can't do that. You might be able to, but your brain can't. Yes. So if you don't have groceries at home and you have a funeral to preach and you got to take your kid to soccer practice and you go to the funeral first and then your neighbor takes the kid to soccer practice and you get home and there's no food, something goes to your brain. There's a ding every time because you put somebody else's need in front of yours. Now you can do that so much. And then there's a point where your brain it throws a fit and says, nope, I don't care about nobody until you care about me.
Exactly. And I see this often in pastors, and it's been interesting watching this play out on Facebook. And I don't even think preachers know they're doing it, but they've hit compassion fatigue. And so they're angry and they're pouting and they're bleeding all over Facebook. And I get it, because you are tired of everyone else's needs being met before yours. But what you really also need to do is take responsibility that you allowed that. Okay.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you naming that, because if you don't know what it is, you don't know that it is normal. And I believe it is God's gift that
That's why I said it for you to say that. Go ahead.
Yeah. That this is not something that I learned. Like, this is actually a thing in our clinical training, that when a person hits compassion fatigue, they will shut down. The problem is if I'm preaching and it will bleed out because I haven't been aware of my shutdown. So I want to say with compassion fatigue, if you just stop and meet one of your needs, you can bounce back way faster than burnout. It is not something that takes forever.
Exactly.
But you have to, like you said, you have to acknowledge and go, you know what? I am upset. I am resentful. I want to go dance on a Friday night, but I got to do my sermon, and I don't want to do a sermon. And being honest with yourself.
Right.
And over time, being honest with those around you. Like, I don't have a life. I don't have these things, but it will come out one way or another. And as a therapist in church, I see it all the time. It's like, oh, that's compassion fatigue. They're not sinful. They're just having compassion fatigue.
Exactly. That's why I say when I see it on Facebook, it's like, oh my God, I get it. Yes. I really do get it. I really do get it. But like you said, one of the things that they taught us in marriage and family counseling about compassion fatigue is that it can be worked out a lot quicker.
Yes.
Once you start to listen to those dings in your head.
That's right.
Like, oh, I really should have gone to the grocery store. Oh my goodness, I haven't worked out in 5 weeks because there were 5 funerals, as if I'm the only one that could do a funeral. And, so like you said, once you start to recognize it, then you can deal with ways. So what other ways do mental health and wellness issues show up in a clergy life? You gave us 2, give us the other 2.
Some other ways that I've seen is it's similar in that I think we all have different little selves. I put them in little circles. I have a spiritual self, I have a social self, a sexual self, an intellectual self, an athletic self. If those selves don't have nourishment in every 24 hours of my life or every week, over time, it will vie for nourishment whenever it can have it. So I work with a lot of clergy that unfortunately get caught in addictions or sexual scandals or these kind of taboo situations because, in my point of view, that little self has been dried out for 15 years. Wow. And then there's this kind of perfect opportunity where, yes, it could be, sinful or temptation, but on a psychological level, it's your body or your mind is going to grab for the very thing it's not being fed. And so I do think a lot about how do we talk about wellness? How do we know thyself? So one of the things I ask people to do is spend time literally building a self-concept outside of work. Not my clergy self.
Who am I for real?
Who am I?
I am not my title. Who am I?
And if I'm a dancer and I'm an artist and I like saucy food, I have to make sure that's happening every week for me. I don't care if I don't dance and my church doesn't dance, that's fine, but I have to dance. Or if I'm an athlete or if I'm a singer, but I'm a clergy person now and I don't sing anymore, I have to sing. There's these things that I have to know myself to know what I need, which can be taboo for clergy to think, what do I need as a human, as a non-clergy, as a non-mom, right? Just as a person. I would work with people to go back to their childhood. When you were a kid, what did you do to cope with stress? What did you like? I do think that's an element that comes out. The last one I'll talk about is just vicarious trauma, which is a big word for I wasn't traumatized, I wasn't assaulted, but when I sit in pastoral care with somebody who was, I hear their story and I think I can just hear the story and it doesn't affect me. But there's a point in which you feel just struck by a story. Yes. And you can't get it out your system. This is an example that personally has hit me. I watched that Surviving R. Kelly series and I thought, I can just watch this. I did sexual abuse trauma work. I'm good. I can't get it out my system. Yep. So something about hearing those stories actually are re-triggering or just traumatizing me because I didn't have the coping skills to hold their trauma. That's not that I'm wrong. It's that I wasn't ready to hear everything. And so sometimes I tell clergy they need to have other outlets after hearing other people's stories to talk to about how it affected them, because it does affect us psychologically and emotionally. And we can get vicarious trauma is getting trauma from someone else's trauma, essentially.
Which clergy often do, especially I'll hear pastors talk about, I buried 20 people this year.
Oh, that is
sitting there like, oh my God, you did what? Or you're clergy and you're saying, I just did the funeral for a child that was 3 and a parent beat them to death. Or I just spent an hour talking with a woman who was raped and her mama died 2 months later, or just died. All of that vicarious trauma.
I will tell you, as a trained therapist who I did suicide and depression work, I did the most extreme crisis work.
Wow.
I was not allowed to not talk to my supervisor after those sessions. Professionally, I have my own therapist, and my supervisor would say, if you don't get your own therapist, we will not let you do therapy, because no matter how trained you are. So it is such again, that role of a clergy, we think that we're supposed to hold those, and we're not. As a therapist, I don't even hold them.
Right. Yeah. And you can't. It will get you. The overload will get you. Even when you don't know it's gotten you, it will get you. You can't just continuously hold vicarious trauma without talking through it, working through it, and etc. Let me check the time, because this is, so easy, so wonderful to do. And like I said, I already asked for my part 2. I already did. Okay. So let me just, because I know we've got to close out. Talk to me about some recommendations. Now, you just given, and I want you to restate those very quickly, the 4 types of trauma. How can we care for ourselves and navigate better clergy work-life stress? Give me the 4 types first. Give me those 4 types again.
Reminding ourselves of burnout. That burnout is overload of work. Vicarious trauma, where I'm hearing somebody else's trauma, I need to process it myself. Compassion fatigue, where I am putting other needs before mine on a consistent basis. And this idea of self-care, where I am not nourishing a part of myself because my job, it can't show up there. And so it needs nourishment. So there's so much we can do. I think the first part, particularly for clergy, somebody like me, strong Black woman, I am self-sufficient, I know things, for me to stop and just acknowledge that I am not well. And it's not bad, that I can say it is okay for me to not be well, that I am human. And there's moments, even I have friends, I have accountability that go, hey, your eyes are big, you're talking fast, you seem resentful, like, I think you need to self-care. Like, or you were triggered, by that story. I think, so I have people who know me enough to go, you're not well, and it is no judgment. So there's something internally that says, as an Angela, I am not supposed to be well all the time. It is natural for me to be sick, to have my distortions, that every couple months, if I haven't gotten sick, I'm like, what's going on, right? That I give myself that grace to know every couple weeks, I have to pause, even if I feel okay, and check in with myself and go, hey, are you okay? Are you happy? Are you feeling joy? Are you isolated? Do you feel like you have friends? There'll be moments I fly with my job. There are moments where I'm like, you know what? I haven't seen my friends in about 6 weeks, and I feel lonely, and that doesn't feel good for me. So just the acknowledgement of what I'm feeling and what's happening for me, and knowing there's no shame. Having safe space for that. So I go to therapy, spiritual direction. You can have a sister crew, a guy crew, something where you have a safe space to talk, but having a space to communicate that. Some other elements I would say is really saying something. So I can think it and know it, but I do have to say it to somebody. There's something about that. And sometimes that's to my job, my employer, to my congregation. And it's like, you know what, guys, I'm taking a mental health day. I am tapping out today. Or are you depressed? No, I'm just 2 symptoms away from it. And so
I'm not going there. So
I'm not going there. And so I know myself. I can have anxiety, and I know when I'm 3 symptoms away from getting that diagnosis. Okay, pull up. I got to go figure out ways. We're on a spectrum. You slide in and out of an illness at times. So saying something. We talked about building our self-concept. I encourage people to have journals, to have kind of sacred space to explore yourself.
Self-concept, exactly.
Yep. It sounds corny, but it would be asking questions like, what's my favorite color? What kind of music do I like? If I were a famous person, these kind of things that we do for other people, do it for ourselves. So I have a little book. I do that with myself over time, just to remind myself of who I am outside of everybody else. One thing I want to talk about is the emotional boundary part, That is, I think all of this should happen in therapy, but I'm biased. I love therapy, but
And
with a good
I
therapist.
believe it can happen in a variety of settings. Okay, I'm trying not to be biased. For all of those clergy, I don't think everything does happen in therapy.
Right.
I want to
No.
encourage more clergy to form accountability circles
Yeah.
with their
Yeah.
peers who are
Mhm.
also going through some of the same kinds of issues so that we can learn to trust each other more. We can learn what vulnerability looks like in public before other people, as well as the therapy, which I absolutely recommend all the time.
Right. And I appreciate you saying that, because I want to kind of name how they're different so people can see that. As a
Exactly.
therapist, my goal is to figure out any psychological workings that an untrained eye can't figure out.
Yes.
Once we figure that out, you're aware of it, we will send you back to what we call a natural community to work it out.
Yes.
So we're not going to heal you completely. What happens is if we go to a natural community and we're trying to work out something that the untrained eye can't figure out, then you would need someone in therapy to go, hey, you're having a trigger response, da, 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 da. Oh, okay. Now, when I go back to my peer group, I can say, hey guys, I'm triggered by this. When you tell me this, say it this way, right? So they are different. And when I say therapy, for those of us who we're struggling in the kind of normal peer moments.
Hold on just a minute. I want you to keep talking, but I'm having some computer issues. Just hold on a second. I've never had this to happen, but this is what I mean about stuff can just go crazy. Okay, I figured that out without my tech person. Sorry about that, everybody. Repeat what you just said, Reverend Whitenhill.
Yeah. Just that for just that you go to therapy or do peer groups or spiritual directors or church for different things, and or sometimes you get all those things done in one space. But just to know that when I say, hey, go to therapy, what I'm meaning is for those of us who we're finding a non-typical struggle in most social settings where we can't trust anybody and everybody's doing the right thing, but we still can't trust them. We may have a psychological process that we don't even know about happening. But for most people, having, your general community would be just fine. So that I appreciate you naming that they are different experiences. And things like emotional boundaries, I do say go to therapy about. That is a psychological process that you need someone to unwind for you. The last one is just we talk about self-care. You can't really care for yourself until you know what you're caring for and you know what part of self needs the care.
Yes.
So I think all the self-care stuff that we all know, yes, those are all great. Knowing when to use them and how to use them is the goal. So if I need to dance, and that's what I really need, then I don't go skiing, I go dance. And so I think that having a list of nourishing activities that we know bring us life, and they're not going to be one size fits all. So your girlfriends may not have the same as yours, and that's okay. But really knowing that they're different.
Yeah. I was talking to a clergy not too long ago, and I said to them, ask yourself, because they are a voracious reader and writer. And I said to them, do you need to be writing now, or do you need to be having sex now?
Yes.
I said, because I'm listening to different things that you're struggling with.
Yes.
And I don't think a book is going to do it for you at this moment. But you need to make that determination. You need to make that determination about what it is that will help you best navigate the moment. Well, we're going to have to wrap up. Are there other than you named the Boundaries books? Are there a couple of other books you want to recommend to folk, or are there any last comments you want to give us before we sign off?
Yeah, I think that book is particularly about boundaries. I don't have any other. They're all very specific to just kind of name. I will say Transitions by William Bridges is a really good the psychology of change. I think a lot of people are struggling with change.
Transitions by William Bridges.
William Bridges is a really good book for congregational change if you're trying to move. So that's a good one. In general, I guess my heart for all of us as clergy is to not be afraid of mental health, not be afraid of mental illness, not be afraid of therapy, but really kind of learn more about what it is and what it isn't, knowing its strength, knowing its limits, versus avoiding it altogether.
Yeah.
Because I do think there is some strength, just like we believe in theological formation, and we know that that's beautiful. That psychological formation is also very necessary. And there are people.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
When it works well,
That's
it's
right.
really, it's beautiful. When
There are
it's
more.
really beautiful.
That's right. And there are more of people like me who are trained both theologically and psychologically. They have these dual degrees now. And so you have people who can weave in and out for you to articulate that. But great websites to educate yourself about what are symptoms, how do they work, and not having fear about them, knowing that they can go away just as easy as they come with the proper help.
Yeah. And what I want to give people one great website that Reverend Whitenhill or therapist Whitenhill, however you want to title her, she's all of those, is nbacares.org. N as in Nancy, B as in boy, A as in apple, cares.org. nbacares.org. It has just a wealth of information. And Reverend Whitenhill has helped contribute to the growth and the formation of that website, nbacares.org. You don't have to guess about it. Maybe, should I, should not. If you believe you need to, do it. Just do it, and do it today. Go ahead, Reverend Whitenhill.
I was going to jump in and say that this website is specifically for people of God thinking about mental health issues. So people ask these questions, and we do whole webinars on how does a pastor tell their congregation they have mental illness? How do you do after school shooting? What does a parent do with their child?
Yes.
All these kind of questions that you might have, we are putting resources, blogs out there to answer them in the context of our faith. So I really appreciate you naming nbacares.org.
Yeah, that an amazing website. I've been on there. Just amazing. The breadth and the amount of information. Now, I'm not sure how she wants to handle this because, you know, she works for a denomination. She's a part of a team, but this is just me because this sister, we only got a taste of it. I mean, when I tell you, it'll really blow your mind, the amount of wealth and training that she has. So I also want to say to, she can get me later for this. When you're older, you just take liberties. If you've got an association, you've got a group of clergy, women, men, you're part of the LGBT community, and you all want to come together as a group, and you want someone to help your group with mental health and related issues, this is the woman. This is the woman. There are a lot of other, like I said, there's some other great people out there with whom I've worked, and I'll be introducing you all to some of those people this year. But this is the baseline. So I started with her. She's the baseline. She has the dual training. She understands the trauma of being a person of color. And so I started with this baseline. So I'm going to ask her permission. Can I give out an email or for you, or do I only have to send people to certain places to reach you? Tell me what to do, because I'm serious. See, I think that it makes sense for the Baptist Ministers Association of Atlanta to bring you in rather than talking about nothing for an hour and a half. Okay? I'm very serious. So how can people contact you? I'm not going to give them your email so they can wear you out or meet you on Messenger, etc. But how can people contact you who want to hire you and or your team?
Yes,
how can they do that?
So I appreciate you naming that, and you're so gracious. Thank you for this. I can give my personal email. For those of us who are disciples, the services are free through MBA. I mean, this is something we do through the Mental Health Initiative. So that would be an email. to my MBA website email, and thinking through how we as disciples can respond. For all the other associations, I think it's just a matter of an email. And if I'm able to, if not, I do, like you mentioned, work with a lot of really awesome people throughout the life of the Disciples Church. And I'm meeting other denominations. I actually serve on the mental health network of the UCC. I'm on their board. And so I'm meeting a lot of people who are thinking about this. Yes. So if anything, I can pass along a really good alternative, but I would be more than happy to just kind of be in communication with people.
Okay. She's so kind and gracious. She really is. She's so kind. So do you want me to give the Angela Ash email?
That could be, yeah. And that would be my personal email. And then on the MBA website, everybody else can find me directly through that website as well.
Okay. Well, I'm just, for now, then I'm going to let people go because I want them to use this amazing website. And then if they bug me to death, I'll give them something personal. But the nbacares.org, you can reach her.
Yes.
You can reach her. And I want you to see that website. I really want you to see that website anyway. That said, one more, and I don't know if this came through in the beginning, from here on in, because as we just talked about earlier, being able to honestly name things, I need to honestly name for you all that I need your help financially. I can't keep figuring out this. Like I said, we're going into year 3. I've paid for it all, research assistance. I've done all of that. I would hope that if you've been helped by this particular broadcast today, number one, that you would share it, but that you would also consider donating through the Cash App. You can just download that app if you don't have it, to Love My Work 123. Love My Work 123. And I'm going to post that as well because this particular session will be posted live on Facebook for the next probably 15 days so that people can view it. So as always, share the video. It doesn't cost you anything and it can help so many other people. God bless you. Hope that you're having a wonderful week. And as I said, I know some of you are in a season of bereavement. I see you. We're praying for you. Reverend Whitenhill, thank you again. And God bless you in all that you do. And we'll be talking further about some of those big plans that I know you have coming up to help the church and others even more. God bless everyone. Have a great week. Bye now.